What I'm going to show you today is information from the National Climate Assessment of the US Global Change Research Program as it presented to the US Congress and the President of the United States. I will clearly demonstrate the data concerning climate change, the information which is underpinning global policy making, as well as planning decisions here in Mochiwaka as being manipulated and deceptive. This here is the main page of the aforementioned report that went out to journalists and policymakers. Yes, US specific data, but indicative of a global issue. This page contains a lot of graphics and conveys a wide range of information. From their overview page on the previous slide, here are some of the detailed infographics. We have one that shows heat waves increasing since 1960, another which shows Arctic sea ice declining since 1979, another one showing wildfires increasing since 1983, and one more which shows sea level rising since 1920. When you want to mislead people with statistics, picking your start date is very important. Let's look at the heatwave graph that starts in 1960s. They carefully picked a period during a global cooling scare to start their graph so they could show heat waves increasing over time. And here is the underlying data from the part of the National Climate Assessment which didn't go out to journalists and politicians. By hiding all the data before 1960, they were able to show a little bit of an upwards trend. The red bars are what policymakers saw, and the extreme heat prior to 1960 is what they didn't see. This graph shows in pink all the data that was hidden from journalists and policymakers. This next graph is the one that shows wildfires increasing in the US since 1983. In this graph of US forest fires from the US Forest Service is the one that didn't go out to journalists and politicians. And you can see why they had all the data before 1983, because there was a lot more burn acreage in the US prior to 1983. This graph shows in pink all the data that was hidden from journalists and policymakers. You can see the breathtaking fraud which is going on here. Now let's look at the Arctic sea ice extent graph, which starts in 1979. Starting in 1979 makes it look like sea ice extent is decreasing linearly. This graph from the 1990 IPCC report shows in pink all the data that was hidden from journalists and policymakers. It's pretty clear why the National Climate Assessment is hiding all the pre-1979 data, because it would wreck their linear downwards trend line. Here's one more graphic showing sea level rising over the past century. Now let's see what they're hiding. Sea level has been rising at the same rate for thousands of years. This graph from NOAA is made from data from the tide gauge at Lower Manhattan. It shows that sea level has been rising at a steady rate since the middle of the 19th century, showing a consistent 2.84 millimeters per year for the past 170 years. In other words, there is no indication that humans have had any impact on the rate of sea level rise. Next one, please. And if we go back even further, we can see that sea level has actually been rising for about 20,000 years. 20,000 years ago, sea level was about 120 meters lower than it is now. From about 14,000 years ago to 8,000 years ago, sea level rose very quickly, but since then it's been quite slow, as we can see. Climate alarmists want you to believe that this 400 feet of sea level rise was all natural, but somehow the last few inches were man-made. Next one, please. Climate alarmists want you to believe that this is a scientific issue and not a political one. Here is a quote from Dr. Ottmar Emenhofer, the IPCC co-chair of Working Group Number 3 in November of 2010. We, the UN, IPCC, redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. In conclusion, what I'm asking here, and what I'm stating, is that if climate change is underpinning your decision-making processes, you must ensure your facts are full and correct. You must prove to the community your information is full and correct. You must take the information you're using to justify any and all projects underpinned by climate change made available in full. Thank you.